Sharon Bowles, thank you very much indeed for joining us on IBTimes UK. One of your remits is bank regulation and running that ship much tighter. So what sort of things are you looking at and what sort of things do you believe ought to happen?
Well, we've just finished the banking regulation that comes from the Basel Committee, the so-called Basel III, where we tailor it to EU requirements through what's called the Capital Requirements Directive 4, which is probably the largest piece of legislation that I'll ever do, and it is huge, and that follows broadly the international agreements, but has got some specialisations in it. I mean, within that I've implemented what I call my growth package, which is made for better trade financing conditions, which is quite important for global trade and growth. We've put in some better conditions for small and medium enterprises so that we can hopefully get more lending going to them. You know, many of the same issues, especially with SMEs, that have been tried through the Bank of England, we've had a different way of going about it. So that's helping on that front. So, but the most of the Capital Requirements Directive is about making banks safer, so that if there is another problem that arises, there's enough capital buffers there to make sure we don't end up having to do what's happened in Cyprus, for example.
I'll come to Cyprus then. I mean, I know that you're unhappy about the conditions of the deal agreed for Cyprus.
The new bailout arrangements I still think are too harsh because the way it's now operating, it's taking away a lot of capital from businesses. So businesses are closing. So we're having a Cyprus now where they're got half the banking sector that they used to have, and a lot of businesses are closing because they've lost capital. And I think they should have taken a little bit more time to find alternative ways that wouldn't be so destructive and that possibly were a little bit more even-handed as well. And also they've put on these capital controls, which if they don't manage to lift those very quickly, then we are seriously in a two-tier Eurozone and against the fundamental treaties of the EU that you have freedom of movement of capital.
Is a European banking union essential, would you say?
Well, a banking union is what you have when you have a proper currency union, as you do in the United States. So you then effectively have a treasury and you're in control of everything. We don't have that in Europe, and the idea to, if you like, finish off making a proper currency zone was to do that. We've taken the first steps in that the European Central Bank now becomes the supervisor for Eurozone banks. It will only directly supervise the biggest ones, but it's still calling the shots, if you like, over all the others, although the local regulators will doing the hands-on inspections and checks. But that's not enough. I mean, we need also a common backstop regime. If you haven't actually got a common treasury, then you need something that, if you like, replicates that. How are you going to deal with cross-border resolutions, and ideally also a common deposit guarantee scheme. Now, some of those could also be open to other countries that are non-Eurozone that want to join as well. I have a slight disagreement over deposit guarantees with the Treasury, because I think that there is a kind of first loss layer of that we could join in with the rest of Europe. And also partly as a way, of course, of keeping ourselves at the table in a stronger way rather than being sidelined.
And do you think that that part of getting towards a banking union will happen? You know, will there be consensus on it?
I think the jury is still out on this. Long term, if the euro is to survive, then they have to accept, if you like, a full banking union. They have to accept mutualisation of debt. And I think theoretically they accept that at some time in the future, but Germany doesn't want to go down that route when it thinks that it might end up literally paying for it by the transfer of funds. But it's hard to see how we're ever going to get towards that through the convergence route. That means getting the economies matched up, because right now they're going in the opposite directions, that there's more difference between those economies in the south in particular, that spent a lot of time, if you like, getting up to speed and getting closer to what the economies of the north are like, and now that's just blown apart. So, the jury is out. I mean, in many ways, I don't feel any more confident about the euro than before, although there's been a period of calm. I think what's happened in Cyprus in particular, it's shaken me to the core, and I think that the euro is probably more under threat now than it ever has been before, even though the markets are still calmer.
Thank you. And you answered the question I was going to ask, about hope, because it almost seems as if there isn't any hope, given the Cyprus situation and how dramatic it was.
Well, I'm still hoping that by extensions and tweaks that we can make the Cyprus situation a little bit better. What I wouldn't give to be around that table. I mean, I just think that the way these things happen, where you have, ganging up fundamentally on a new president who's hardly been in office that long, is just not the way in which I expect Europe to behave. I actually think it's shameful. But at the same time, while that was going on in the UK, all that you got in newspapers, and I'm afraid from the Chancellor, was a celebration of, well, thank goodness we're not paying for any of this. Then what's the next thing we're doing? We're ferrying money out for our forces, and then agreeing actually, well, we're going to help out here and there and wherever. I mean, I did feel I was somewhat in a shame sandwich between the UK and the EU or the Eurozone, neither of which I thought was actually behaving or pronouncing as I thought was the right supportive, let's sort this out kind of way that I thought Europe was meant to be about.
Does that not worry you then? Because, that was really, like you say, it was an awful lot of pressure on a new president who it seemed was very, very rushed into a decision. We've got to get this sorted now. It seemed like a very panic-filled situation. And does that not worry that this is going to happen to other countries who will be in a similar financial position?
Well, I think they do worry. Yes, it was a total ambush. I think it was premeditated. That's quite clear. The kinds of solutions were premeditated, and they were obviously determined to browbeat a solution that evening, when it's now clear they couldn't possibly be in possession of all of the relevant facts concerning the banks, because if you compare the proposals that the IMF made, saying, well, we'll close a couple of banks and it will be 40% haircuts on the uninsured deposits, we know that no way meets when they're doing something sort of broadly similar now. So I think, frankly, I think it was pretty amateurish and shocking. Other countries are worried that when they're need help, then they're going to have similar bullying going on, and that if the business model doesn't suit the Germans, then they'll be put upon. But that only happens to small countries where they think, well, it won't rock the Eurozone. Once you get to the size of Greece or obviously Spain or Italy, then you say, well, I won't play ball and we'll all be in a mess. And so they can fight back and have done successfully. But for the likes of say, Malta, which is pretty scared, I think it's devastating, and it shows that some countries are more equal than others in the EU, which is not how it's supposed to be. And I've always been somebody who has been in favour of European principles. Yes, I can accept the pragmatic side and we're in it for the economy and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, there's supposed to be some spirit there, and for me, the spirit has been killed.